I think there is something in No that you can hardly find in any other form of theater, which is dealing with the enigma itself, the enigma of theatrical endeavor and the secret of actors' transformation. Well, I think it's because it's so enchanting and it's seducing. It has a great seducing power. Once you start it, you discover how deep it is and how far you can go. And then the road is open for you to explore. I think the reason by which an actor can enter the No world are multiple and differ from the Eastern, the Japanese one, to the Western one. And then you rather have to harmonize your movement with the type of mask you're wearing on, and not the other way around, in which is you first imitate behavior and then you somehow harmonize the expression of your face and then maybe create a mask for it. Lévi-Strauss wrote a very nice book, Savage Mind, in which he describes the functioning of a, let's say, pre-modern mind that operates mostly a very complicated world of categories and classification. And I think No is, to a big extent, the hair of such thinking. And both elements of the stage and especially of the costume, patterns on the costume, and masks and types of persons, types of music, bring in like elements of this world of inner classification into one component, into one entity on stage. So when we're getting back again to the savage mind, is that you impress your vision of a type, of a certain inner landscape, and make a sculpture, which happens to be a mask, beautiful sculpture. And then by making choice which sculpture you use, you put on stage and make it move later on, to which you then try to relate other elements of the performance, including your own vision and your own heart. And masks, I think, in particular, bring in this bring into focus that one thing that we later on call personality or presence of the hero of the soul. And some, I think, quite many of the No masks are very demanding, because they are exquisite pieces of sculpture, of art, and you can create really different feelings in the viewer by just changing the angle of the face and of the face of the mask. The women pieces, the katsura pieces, form the top level of the No accomplishment. At least it's been said so in theory, like in treatises by Zami, in which the male actor has to transform himself into a woman, but not by making himself similar, but in a way dissimilar, but just through acting out of women's features within that complex composition of elements, No costume, technique, music. Well, I'm not sure if it relates to modern Japan, but I hope it relates to something that will come. Because in a way, No is it is a very sophisticated form of art, very, very, very sophisticated, and perhaps we have skipped in our Western culture a certain necessary stage of development of our art and sensitivity, which has been abandoned or lost perhaps, or never really discovered, which was discovered and worked out in pre-modern Japan, in medieval Japan. And then we are still in a time where the two cultures, by merging together or influencing each other, have not yet come to the point in which can be reabsorbed by as a very modern way of making theater. We are still on our way to rediscover musicality in theater and this sort of density and extreme demand put on actor's technique, also both on his body and on his mind. We have lost that notion of doing theater because it's a deep and demanding vocation to which you have to devote all your vitality and energy, and then which you also are obliged to transmit to next generation. Perhaps we are cut away from that tradition, but maybe, who knows, it will rebound. It operates in its best on a very thin border between the usual and the unusual, the profane and the sacred. And once again, it grows from a completely different notion of the space, of the universe, of the imaginary, of the day, of life, of two sexes. It's very important that in the now you get a very defined and very precise net of rhythm and melody, sort of patterns, within which the actor can orientate himself very precisely and very well what he is doing, and then he can divide his attention and his breath and his consciousness accordingly. So it's extremely important for the actor that the music exists and it's done in a good way. Then there is I think it's also very important the way that musicians communicate between themselves through their breath and through taking those unspoken breaks between actions, into which then actor can weave his own action. And then by bringing the two together, the attention, the breath and rhythm of musicians and the actor, another sort of tension can be created, and it is created. And it winds the tension of the play higher and higher and higher until the climax when it ends. It's very hard to talk about significance of music. It's better talking about its dramatical qualities. And again, it's situated on a totally opposite pole to what we call incidental music or music made for theater. Because no draws its dramaturgy very much, to a big degree, from its musicality. And it has utterly musical structure in which there is a certain doubleness, the double structure of universe or reality is confirmed, that there is a superficial, the world of appearances, and there is the world of essence. And in order to get from one into the other one, you need to go through a sequence of musical particles or cells, which are in a very neat way, juxtaposed. And this is very interesting. It's quite amazing when you think about how notes slowed down throughout centuries. We now tend to identify with the slow motion, but actually there is no confirmation whatsoever in historical documents that it was really slow. In 16th century, definitely, it was played about 2 times quicker than now. And judging from the studies, one can tell that it slowed down definitely in 19th century. And my guess is that it also slowed down, paradoxically enough, in 20th century. Because if you compare the tempo of certain plays being played now and with the tempo of the same play played in, let's say, 20s of the 20th century, 1920 something, you can see that it already slowed down. So in its origins, no contributed, I mean, the art of women performers contributed a lot to development of No itself. And we can easily imagine that those women played really very different roles of both men and women. That was interesting. The name of the art was Sarugaku before it was named No. And we know of Sarugaku women troops acting, working in the Western Japan. They were quite popular. And even the pioneer of the No, of the form we know now, Kanagi, it is said that he learned that particular form of dance and act that brought him great success from a woman, kusemai dancer, shirabyoshi dancer. Little by little, first, as I told it already, I discovered it through a theory and certain theater philosophy. And then I discovered the No texts, which are just pieces of wonderful literature, beautiful and very powerful. But if you wrote a good poetical text and added that incredible tension of the discovery, then and if you did it on a musical score, very skillfully playing with rhythm and change of tone, then you could probably make a good No. So if you want to draw a comparison between the No text and Shakespeare, you could probably zoom into a situation in which Juliet wakes up from her slumber, from her faked death, only to discover that Romeo is dead indeed. And then she comes to her decision to kill herself. And if you really stretch that moment and this situation and enlarge her suffering and add to it the memory of their happily being together and the terrible despair in which she finds herself, then probably you could write a No on this, on the basis of this. So there's never such really long, elaborate story. That comes later with Kabuki. But I've been thinking about this spiritual versus non-spiritual, or ordinary and extraordinary. Well, spiritual element, No, as embodied in the presence of spirits, of the dead. It's quite important to know that distinction has not been made until quite late. Even within the No categorizing, between the so-called Mugen No, which is the fantasy No, which is seeing ghosts, and Genzai No, and the real No, the No about contemporary, well, let's say people. For in former times, distinction between the world of the living and of the dead was blurred. And some say it's that thin, like, you know, the two sides of the same paper. And it's precisely the way it works in No. Through there are just moments in which you can feel the presence of the spirit, and then you don't feel it. So it's wavering between the two, and constant presence, but not always visible. And playing around it is very important. That creates the essence of the No. So actually in all No you have this supernatural element, and sometimes it's clearly the presence of a ghost, and sometimes it's the presence of madness, of derangement because of love affair, or because of separation with someone you love, mother and a child. It's almost supernatural. It's that powerful. On the other hand, there's a historical fact that there were women warriors, and Toma is the only play that survived to nowadays. I think it's in general the best of no plays are being said to be women pieces, to be pieces devoted to women. And you can discover really many types of women within that category. But, well, Toma is different because it's about a warrior woman who tried to place herself on an equal position aside with her lover on the battlefield, and then even to survive him and to act out his warriorness, to be first of all a warrior and then a woman, and in this finding her femininity, which is quite particular and rather aligned to the Japanese culture that we know nowadays, and that of course existed before the Edo period. I was fortunate enough to see a very good No performance in Paris with Kanze Hisao, very famous actor. And I was so moved, and it was not only me. I think it was a particularly good performance because I saw people, in the audience, Frenchmen, almost crying. And they had good reasons to be really moved. So I was very fortunate. And then I think one of its attractions is its cleanliness. Usually, the theater world it's a dirty world. Physically, if you go behind the scenes and you see machinery or the rehearsals themselves, the way actors' troops have to travel, and it's a world of big physical effort and lots of darkness, dust, and somehow the No world, because it's still in a way medieval or Tokugawa for that reason, it's a clean world, and of course you exert your body to the extreme, but yet it's done in a somehow very healthy way. I don't know how to express it otherwise. I think that happened probably around the beginning of Edo, and with coming of Neo-Confucianism, and that philosophical, time in the Japanese thinking and the outlook. Because previously you have an impression you are dealing with a theater in which there are many pieces with very powerful characters, both men and women, old men, young men. Then you have presence of goddesses. Then you have presence of wild nature, embodied in like in Yamamba, like the mountain witch. I'm not quite sure when it happened. But it seems there was a major change and major shift in perception of women as a heroine and women as a character in pre-modern Japan and modern Japan, and which is like magna mater, like the great nature, wild, demanding, destroying, killing, loving. You still have it. You have very powerful presence. You have heroes, you have gods, you have warriors, you have women, you have men. There's no real distinction between them. Then there is this ideal of a women's play, of a heroine of a court literature, as being probably the most demanding for the actor to embody on scene, if he were a man. Well, perhaps equally difficult were pieces like Tomoe, demanding on the part of women to play a man's role. But of these we don't really know much. And then with a new philosophy and new society and new concept of women in a society, this change took place. then we have sort of disappearance of powerful, equal to men, personages, persons in heroes in literature and theater, and appearance of certain ideal and of certain abstraction called woman that has to be or can be attained by a male performer.